let's do this again.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Art of Intervention Project, where we're here to talk about why are interventions important? How can they help your families? And this is going to be a resource for families and professionals. And Carol Lawyer accepted my invitation to be a part of this. So, Carol, thank you so much. And why don't you go ahead and just kind of give people a snapshot of who is Carol?
Thank you. I'm, pardon me, Carol Lawyer. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I am a professional. I have been an addiction specialist and working with recovering people and their families for approximately 28 years. I also am an interventionist, and I work nationally and am capable of working internationally. And I also helped bring up the certified intervention professional credential because I discovered that interventionists were purchasing credentials. I went to the Pennsylvania board and helped them become aware that individuals were buying credentials. We then went across the country and found individuals to help us write the credential for interventionists and to develop a legitimate credential and an exam, and that is currently available today. It is something I'm very proud to have been able to be part of and to bring to our profession and be willing to speak about, and have had brought people together from an organization we started, the Association of Intervention Specialists. I had been part of that board for many years, and we were very instrumental in partaking of that project. And so I can do a shout out for them as well. I have been very dedicated and grateful for being sober 37 years myself, because I almost died from drinking. And I really did not believe I could stop drinking. My body was addicted as well as my spirit. Mm. And so I was one of those girls that could not function without a drink. I actually could not walk. I had seizures. And way back then, there was not the education available nor the resources available to understand that that's how addicted my physical being was, along with my emotional being. And so I knew I needed to drink, but I did not know that I could die from it. And so I knew that I physically was so tied to the substance, and yet I did not come from a family who drank at all. And so I was not aware of what substances did to an individual. I was so naive. And I was a child that was your hero child, that did everything perfectly. And so when I became instantly addicted in my 20s, I had no clue that that's what was going on. So it was a very sad time for me, and one where I did not know if there was any hope in the process for me. I am one of those recovering alcoholics that had the gift of desperation one New Year's Day when nothing was open. And my so-called boyfriend left in the middle of the night with my vodka. And I turned to my higher power, which I had done. I was a very spiritual young woman, but at that point in my life, I turned away from my God of my understanding because I was ashamed. And I did not have anywhere else to go. And so I did turn to my God and asked for help. And I lived, much to my astonishment. Not that I felt like I wanted to live because I was so sick.
Yeah.
From that point on, it was a daily decision as to whether I was going to stay sober or not. I had no real long-term plans, and I had to find myself back into a market of working very temporary jobs, not knowing anymore where I fit in or belonged. And so I took that process very slowly and carefully, and I was a single girl, and grateful, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, so this was 30, you said this was 37 years ago, right?
Correct.
And the only thing back then was probably 12-step program to maybe help people. Is that what was going on back then?
Yes, I was involved in AA, had wonderful friends in AA that I made instantaneously because almost at the same time, my mother was told she had cancer and was going to probably die from that cancer. And she was truthfully my only and closest friend, so to speak, or support system. I grew up in a fairly abusive household, meaning my father and brother. I only have one sibling. And so when I learned that I was losing her, it was very traumatic for me. And she did die shortly after I was a year sober. So it forced me to reach out to those around me in AA. And it literally brought me to my knees. And those people held me till I could literally function on my own. I did not relapse, and I remember thinking to myself, if I did not need to drink over this, I don't need to drink over anything.
Amen to that.
Oh boy. So it was a true gift to me, those individuals and the people that gathered around me. And I still participate in meetings in that same clubhouse to this day. And I always felt like I never wanted to move away from this area, even for that reason. I did meet my spouse at that clubhouse eventually, and he just passed 4 years ago this March.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. From a cancer. And that was a terrible loss for me. But again, having great support systems and being sober, and again, getting the other support systems in place, such as counseling and what I needed to do, allowed me to
hey guys, for those that aren't seeing the video part of this, we just had Mike join us in the conversation, right?
Yes.
Hey Mike, good to hear you. I can't hear you very well. So are you on what are you talking through, Carol? Is it a computer?
It's my computer, yes.
Okay. All right, so I may just need to have you lean closer, Mike. But hey, Mike, welcome to the party. We're here talking about our life stories, and we're going to get into interventions here in just a second. But thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I have been, been able to maintain my sobriety while I was not a therapist when I got into sobriety. I was actually a food broker.
Okay.
And sponsoring some young ladies, and one of their psychologists asked me if I had ever thought about becoming a therapist. She thought I would be good in the field. And I said, I was doing volunteer work in a detox in a hospital weekly. And I said, I haven't given a lot of thought, but I think I'd like to do that, but I'm not sure how to begin. And she said, call me tomorrow and I'll let you know. So I did that. I called her and she gave me the number of the Pennsylvania Certification Board. And I called them the next day and I got started. I went back to school at night and to Penn State and started taking their graduate courses. It took me 8 years at night while I continued being a food broker to get my credentials. And it was a long haul back then. It's not like the 72-hour courses that they offer today. And I am so grateful I did that.
Yeah, well, we are too, because our community needs people like you, and you saw a path and you went down that path, and now you get to do what you do to help change so many lives all over the country. And obviously your professional career has grown since then, but you said it took you 8 years,
At
but you
night,
did
yes.
it, but you did it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Especially like you said, I mean, how many years ago was that? That was when?
Wow. I forget what year I actually passed the exam. 19, I'd have to look at my license. My credentials. It was a while ago. At least 25 years ago. So it was worth, when they told me it would take that long, I thought, what did I get myself into? And
Right.
thought, I will not sustain this. And yet each inch of the process, I was more and more committed. And so my internship was working with the population of people that were coming out of prison and going into prison. It was a lot of itinerant workers in the mushroom industry, because I'm in that industry. We live near that industry, and a lot of their women of the night, so to speak, that they bring into their camps. And so a lot of abuse, physical abuse, and hardships. And so the training and supervision that went into that internship, and I worked there while I was going to school, and part-time while I was still working. So it was a wonderful experience.
Sounds like it. What a journey.
Yes.
What a journey you've been on, and kind of where you are now in the world of interventions and again, helping families and the individuals as well. So I'd love to switch gears a little bit, and thank you for sharing your story, and maybe talk about this world of the art of intervention, and where we talk about interventions and addiction and recovery and transformation, which obviously you've gone through those channels in your own life, but you had like a divine intervention.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, kind of like myself. So over 18 years ago, God intervened. I never went to detox or treatment. It was just like I never had to drop alcohol my entire life. And sometimes those happen, but we're part of that small percentage of people. So let's talk about, like, what is an intervention?
Okay. For us, and Michael does interventions with me, we mostly do a Johnson model of intervention. However, we will modify our process to fit and customize any situation.
And for those that don't know what a Johnson model is, can you kind of describe that from your point of view?
Surely, it's mostly the surprise model of intervention. And we meet with the family and the participants, who we help the family or the spouse or whoever's coming to us without the individual to be intervened upon, it is a surprise to that individual. And so we will meet with everybody but that person and prepare up until the time of the intervention. And we will prepare with them if it even needs to be a year before, for as long as it takes till we think it's an appropriate time. However, it's usually more of an emergent situation when people come to us.
Yeah. Do you ever see the need to slow the process down for the family that just wants to jump in and just let's go now, to maybe regroup them and say let's hold off for a little bit?
Well, yeah, we want to make sure that the time frame that we're doing it in allows for the appropriate structuring to ensure the success of the intervention. There are a number of things that I've always been a believer of, and I was taught about doing an intervention, is the first thing that you need to do is to convince the people that it's actually necessary.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, I want to make sure you're in the picture on this too. Can you angle the camera a little more so both of you are in it a little bit, like the other way?
Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. How's that?
Because I'm losing. I got half your face there. So let's go back to what you were
I'd rather
just.
half my face, so it looks thinner, but
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, we want to get both of you in there too. So so Mike, just kind of go back and talk about the kind of what you were just saying about the Johnson model and just kind of.
Well, the Johnson model was basically a new variation of going in and trying to berate someone into treatment. The Johnson model really, and something that we expressed to the families during the process of discussing what needs to be said and how it needs to be said, is helping them understand that we're doing this because we love you, not because we're angry at you and so on and so forth. But we have come to a place in our lives where we are just unable to watch you kill yourself any longer. And you have a choice whether you would like to go to treatment or not. If you choose to go to treatment, we're in with you 24/7. But if you choose not to, we are just not willing to participate in the destruction any longer. There are too many people that are being harmed. And that is something that we have to really help them understand and work their way through some of the anger, the fear, and the frustration that has gone along with their experience. Because by the time they get to us, they've often had a number of attempts to get this person to do what needs to be done on a number of occasions. So it's not something new, and they've quite often gotten to a place where they're pretty hopeless. You know, they don't think that this person's really going to change, that the treatment is going to be successful. So you have to help them identify that, you know, it's not so much how the person gets to treatment, it's what happens once they get there. And being a participant in that process and learning as much about the disease as their family member is going to. So they understand what they're dealing with, rather than this being a matter of being weak or just not wanting to. It's because they're sick, and that, you know, their brain and the section of the brain responsible for being able to make the abstract connections with the damage being done by the addiction process is really, you know, obscure to the person who has the disease. They can't see that because their abstract thought is blocked. So recognizing how it affects the family, you will hear many, many alcoholics, I'm sure that you've experienced this, and say, I thought it was only hurting myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And as time goes on, they become better and better at identifying, you know, the damage that's been done by their drinking or drug use or whatever the untreated chronic illnesses. You know, these problems that you see are not just because of addiction. You know, if you see a person who's not responding to heart treatment or diabetes or any other chronic illness, you'll see the stages of the family and the same factors being important in addressing to help them get the type of help that they need and to put them in a position where they can establish stability and, you know, complete remission of whatever it is that their condition is.
Yeah, definitely. And as we talk about the individual and we talk about the family, I mean, this is a family system issue,
Right.
right? I mean, because we
Yes.
sit there and we hear the stories of, well, my husband's been this way for 10 years. And when I hear that, I'm like, well, I know you've been along the ride for 10 years. So in situations like this, I feel like people are doing the best they can with the tools that they have to help their loved one. Now it's time to use someone like you guys, an interventionist, to help take that to another level to help them.
Well, maybe, it was interesting. We were up in Cape Cod this year, and there's a guy that spoke there that I know. He's not a personal friend of mine or anything of that nature, but, I went through the CSAT trainings and stuff with Patrick Carnes, and I met him through that. His name is Rob Weiss. And he was doing one of the breakout sessions, and he talked about a new book that he was putting out called Prodependency instead of Codependency. And just like you were talking there, just jarred my thinking that he was, talking about they've invested 10 years of their lives trying to help this person. And it can't be all that selfish for them to have done that. And they're trying to save something that they, at one time at least, thought was very important. So what they've been doing is engaging in prodependency. And, the connotations with codependency have been fairly negative.
Yeah. I'm laughing
Right.
because I interviewed Dr. Weiss on a show, my Beyond the Bars radio podcast not too long ago. And that's exactly the phrase I just said to you a minute ago is exactly from where I got that from Dr. Weiss, because he's exactly right.
Let there be no question, I'm a thief. When I hear something really good, I'll try to grab it. But I did good. I did not plagiarize that.
Yes.
I made sure that I gave him credit for the idea. But at the beginning, I thought that was crazy, right? It didn't register for me for a day or so. And then I started thinking about it, and I was, you know what? This might be something that is a viable new approach.
Yeah.
Or thought process towards the people who have been involved with trying to keep their families together, their marriages together, their husband employed, their wife employed, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Well, it actually sounds a little more appealing because it sounds like they're a pro. You know what I'm saying? So it, I think, has a better mouthfeel towards it.
Yeah, well, you started lighting up when he was talking about that too, when Mike was just talking about Carol.
I remember,
because
I was there.
Yeah, because it is a shift, right? And I want families to hear that too, because as we talk about interventions, there's a crisis happening. And families don't know what to do. That's why they call people like us to get help, right? And they come from this world of, well, my husband, my family member, my whatever is an addict. They're addiction.
Right.
They're addicted to something. And families can overreact, they can underreact, whatever. But when we talk about addiction, my wife likes to say, one of her counselor friends would say, addiction is the inability to deal with emotional pain, right? Because we're covering up with something. But how do both of you look at the disease of addiction, the chemical and physical dependency, as how do you tell if someone is addicted?
Well, I continue to use the NCA model, chronic, progressive, potentially fatal. Symptomology is abnormal elevation of tolerance, physical dependence when consumption is reduced or stopped, or pathologic organ damage as a result of long-term ingestion. It's a much more simplified, but I came into this kind of work back in the early 80s, and it was right at the time when Milam's Under the Influence was gaining some traction. And a lot of the studies that came out that no one disputes anymore about the genetics. But once they do that, they shift in many ways to the old Minnesota model, the psychoanalytic process approach, and things of that nature. All things that I don't see as symptomatic or ideological, but I see them as factors as far as people and their ability to recover without relapse. Because when they get into these situations where they're emotionally unable to deal with things, they will often turn to using substances because it works for them. And the reason it works for them is because of physiology. Okay, the liver doesn't know that they're having a crisis in their marriage. The liver doesn't know that they lost their job. The liver doesn't know that they got arrested. The liver doesn't know anything other than what you're putting into the system. And then the physiological abnormalities that were written about in the beginning by Dr. Silkworth in the doctor's opinion of the book Alcoholics Anonymous back in 1935. I mean, Silkworth knew a lot more about the effect of acetaldehyde on the body and the alcoholic than anyone ever imagined back then. But as time has gone on, when we look at, Valent's work at, at Harvard when he was doing his longitudinal studies up there, and, the ongoing work that has been done by Croninger and Milam and, so many other geneticists, even, the early days of Jellinek were rooted in this stuff, but got lost. And there are a lot of different influences of why we still continue to approach it from a psychoanalytic precept. But I think that the paradigm shift would be to understand the etiology of addictive disease is primarily genetic, and that the recovery process is contaminated by these other emotional, social, and psychological deficits that the person has that's engaging in the recovery process. And that's where the work, often happens. But the first thing, the most important word in all that I just said was chronic, is helping them understand that they're not going to ever be able to drink or use substances successfully to deal with life. And then assisting them in making a commitment to that process.
So we will use with the families as well a type of a genogram to try and trace some of the history and help them understand, because usually they have little to no understanding. And, as they start sitting with us, we start pulling together the pieces on each side of a family of both mental illness and addictions, and so that we also can prepare for any crisis that might occur during an intervention, and we can avert. And we want the safest environment we can prepare for, and understand what might be underlying some of what we're about to work with if we decide to go to intervention. So.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing you just said right there. You decide to go to intervention. So when people call you, it's not always going to be an intervention, possibly, right?
Not at all.
Yeah, so tell people some instances, because you said in your story earlier that you didn't really have addiction in your history. But
well, there was generations before that on my father's side, but he was the youngest of 7. And all my grandparents came from another country. And so I didn't get to see any of that. And so my father took a pledge not to drink.
Mm. Okay, so from what he saw, he made the commitment to break that journey, right? And
yes.
I just think all these little tidbits are great for families and professionals to hear this, right? Because some people say, well, you're gonna be this because of that, and because Uncle Billy and Fred, but here we are back to they're calling you and saying, we need intervention. But again, it may not turn into that. So how do you work with families that you say, I don't think an intervention is the way to go, but here's how we can help you?
Yeah, especially with people that, may not have had treatment before, or earlier on in their, their careers and the progression of the illness. It's true that, the medical surgical process that has been applied to addiction treatment by, the managed care companies has been found in a lot more research than we ever thought of doing. And they have a pretty clear understanding of what it's going to take to apply med-surg criteria for the need for hospitalization. And the problem being in our industry is that we have not kept pace with that. And we automatically go into, or my experiences with working with other clinicians is that as soon as they start talking about being an ACOA or codependent or something of that nature, it does not meet the criteria for justification for med-surg placement. So they won't give them enough time to deal with these things related to the recovery process for this person and dealing with the initial phases of withdrawal, which are med-surg certified. So when we're not dealing with someone like that, there may be situations where a person might, for example, be suggested that we refer them to a sober house and that they go to an IOP while there and attending meetings and possibly giving them the opportunity to remain engaged in employment, things of that nature. And if they fail and the disease progresses, then we have to do what any other doctor would do, and that's increase the intervention to try to deal with and address whatever the needs are of the person to give them a realistic chance for recovery.
And pick an appropriate, help them choose an appropriate sober situation so that they're medically sound and safe as well, so that we vet many different situations before we suggest where they go.
Yeah, well said. It's good to know that when the phone rings and you pick up, it's not like, let's rally the troops and get the, it's a process, right? This is a process. So let's just say,
we do have a hole cut in the floor with a fireman's pole. That if we get a call at like 2 o'clock in the morning, we will like head out with our boots and stuff on, just like a fireman.
Cool. Does the pole go straight into the car, or do you have to get in and
Right
get
alongside the car.
Okay, it's alongside. Okay, cool. So
there's a Keurig right there. Get some coffee for the ride, and then we're off. It's just like, you know, Batman or something.
Nice. I like it. I like it. And I'm sure the license plate is AIS, right, Carol?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. We'll talk more about that offline too. So, okay, so here we are. Let's say an intervention is needed. We determine there's an addiction and there needs to be a plan to go to place. So can you walk families through in kind of a simplistic way of what are the steps going to look like for them going from the phone call to the time they actually meet with their loved one to go to hopefully a facility, which I know you all vet and make sure they're good facilities to go to. So let's say all that's in line. What are they going to expect?
Well, we're going to provide them an opportunity to, if they're interested after doing a brief consult with us on the phone, a copy of our contract so that they understand what that looks like and have an opportunity to look that over. After they sign that, we will then start with a first session that is an educational session for all those who are going to participate in the intervention. And so if they're close by to where the intervention is going to be taking place, we will meet in person. And if not, we'll conference them in any which way we need to. And we will have that initial session with them so that they can ask as many questions as they can, get as much feedback as we possibly can give them, address all the concerns, because certainly people still today are fearful of intervention. So, you know, many times people have attempted suicide or told their loved ones, if you try this on me, I'll kill myself, or something like that. And we're trying to help them understand it's another manipulation many times. Of course, we're going to assess if the individual has attempted suicide or any type of behaviors like that. However, we try to gather people together so that we're understanding that the people that they're inviting in are committed to the process, because we want this to be successful. And if they're not, we're probably going to kindly suggest that they not participate, maybe write a letter from their level of being comfortable. And we will, you know, have it read for them, because we do provide a format of a letter for the intervention day that we ask participants to follow, so that we don't have people just go off on tangents. And so we will, if we need to do more than one session like that, we will, or invite private calls of the participants. And from that session, we might even invite further people in for the intervention based on feedback we get.
So all along the way, it sounds like you're just continually assessing the situation to change the plan for the best outcome.
Very much so. We're from that first contact, we're first and foremost trying to ascertain information that will verify, like you were asking earlier, the need for an intervention. And is this person actually suffering from a physiological or psychiatric, possibly psychological condition that places them in danger? That would then ultimately necessitate the effort to get this person into an environment where they can be medically taken care of. We also talk to them about the options of places. We don't just give them one place. We will tell them, this, from our experience, is our choice for your loved one, but there are other factors, you know, about insurance, and, you know, there's a lot of self-pay programs out there today. Some families are unable to do that. So we will find, you know, the best matchup that we can with whatever resources that they have, that they don't wind up mortgaging the rest of their lives. I unfortunately have been privy to families investing $125,000, $150,000 of their retirement in treatment, and primarily for people who were not responding to that treatment. You know, and the efforts by some of these programs to try to guilt the family member or prey on their fear, so to speak, about their loved one dying. I mean, the overdose rate with the most recent opioid crisis has got people with children that are 16 to 30 just absolutely freaked out. And there are programs that I know have preyed on that. And they need someone to advocate for them. So Carol and I have spent a lot of time visiting programs and getting to know the, you know, the ins and outs of what goes on there and things of that nature before we will ever even consider referring someone that we're working with to that program. And we will assist, if the family wants us to try to negotiate some kind of a financial agreement, and that they understand upfront what it's going to take for their family member to get treatment at that facility. So, you know, then we also look at, you know, their history of attempted interventions, although they may not look like them. The family has probably said something to this individual before, and what have they said, and what are they going to be, you know, prepared for, because they're banking on you saying the same thing you've said in the past, which didn't work. Right? Yeah. So now we have to find a new way, a new road to getting behind this individual's defenses and helping them understand that what we're doing is because the concern for their physical and medical safety. And, you know, then establishing a link between that and who the people are that are going to be involved, helping them identify this person's potential reasons for not going or not agreeing. They're predictable, they're cyclical, and they're repetitive. You will hear the same. If someone's going, it goes to treatment because of their family, you can bet that somewhere along that process, the reason they want to leave or not do whatever is necessary is because of their family. I need to get home. My kids are worried about me, so on and so forth, right? My job. And they will go back to work and they will work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for a year, trying to make up for what they did or didn't do while they were drinking. Mm-hmm. And then, making sure that the family is integrated into the treatment process, that the primary people are there to engage the individual and talk about what it's been like, what happened, and what it's going to be, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah, they get to speak the same kind of language, a language of recovery, right? And
yes,
I'm sure families say to you, well, why do I need to do the work? He's the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your response to that, Carol?
That's a big roadblock, because the family is as sick, if not sicker, than the alcoholic or the addict in a lot of instances. So trying to get them to engage in Al-Anon, they say exactly what you're talking about, or going to the family program, or so on and so forth. That is a very, very important part of the intervention that we do then with the family. And while the main individual is in treatment, we continue to be engaged with our folks, throughout the treatment process. And, as long as they would like or find benefit from our services. But if the person doesn't go to treatment, we are there for them until I tell them, Carol and I tell them, we're linked for life. As long as we're alive, we're linked. So you don't ever have to be concerned about bothering us or anything else. We've already got this relationship that there's a problem or a question or a concern, call us.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that too. And so that's important for people to hear, because I know some interventionists out here, which none of them I've interviewed for the Art of Intervention project, but there are interventionists out there that just want to come in, they're going to do the intervention, they're out. Thanks for the check, I'm out. This is why we do things like this, to provide a resource to say, hey, it is important to know how long your interventionist is going to be with you and the family. And to hear something like we're linked for life, and to be of assistance. And it's not to be like, well, we work with them 1 hour a day forever, but it's like you're there as a resource to help them. And the day of the intervention comes, like everyone, you've prepared them, they're ready to go. You've talked about the 2 or 3 options that you give the family, and you've decided, okay, so, subject X, friend X, loved one X, whatever we want to call it, this is, we're geared to go to place A. That's plan A is go to place A. And because we figure that's the best place. So here's the day of the intervention, right? And I know there's no straight answer of this is exactly what happens, but ideally, what would a day look like on that day of the intervention? Of course, we're laughing because we know it's never the same, but if it worked really well, what would it look like?
Well, if it worked really well, we'd have a meeting time somewhere in the morning, usually 8, 9 o'clock. We have a rallying point with all the people who are involved in the intervention, that we all meet there. We then will get in the appropriate number of cars with 4 or 5 people in a car to drive to the intervention, and we knock on the door. We walk in, the person has either gotten out of bed or is already up or whatever, and we have it already. Carol's big thing is making sure that we have a structure of where everybody's going to sit and how people are set up to sit, with 2 individuals that this individual is not going to hit, on either side on the sofa or something of that nature. And then we just tell them that, she says, I'm Carol Lawyer, and I tell them I'm Mike Pichkowski, and your family's asked us to be here to discuss something very, very important with you. And we'd like for you to just sit down and listen until we're done, and then you can have your opportunity to share. And then we go right into the letters that they've read. Carol prescribes an order of which the people are going to read their letters in. And she's
why is that important? Let me interrupt. Why is that important, the order in which they are read, Carol?
Because usually the first person that we choose is to help them engage with that person. And so it's usually one of the least threatening individuals. And then we stagger people so that they can at least grab on in the beginning and won't push back right away. It's somebody that they may feel a desire to be close with and they feel some safety with. So we're trying to pick that person out that they'll want to hear them, and it usually works. So, you know, we pay close attention to that, and we do ask for feedback as well, you know, as we're going around, and we might stagger them a little bit different as we hear the letters. So we take our time in doing our rehearsal the day before, the night before. We have a rehearsal. We really try to impose upon that because it's a critical step. We had a situation maybe almost a year ago where a husband called us and his wife was very ill. And he kept trying to avoid being part of, actually, her sister called us. And she said the husband was sober many years. And he kept trying to avoid being part of some of the meetings. And then when we met, he showed up and he could only stay briefly. And then when he showed up for the rehearsal, he didn't have his letter, but he would have it the next day. And then on the day of the intervention, and people started reading their letters, the wife finally said to him, look, this is going no further till you tell the truth. Mm. And here he turned out being her drug dealer, essentially. He was going out in the middle of the night, picking up the drugs, and he was using right along with her. And his children thought, his boys who worked in his business with him, thought all along he was sober. And they were so traumatized. They were devastated that they couldn't trust their father. Hmm. So it was a very dramatic situation.
We wound up doing 2 interventions.
At once. We got him off the next day.
I was going to ask you if you've ever had kind of like a, hey, I need to go now. And then there you go. There's that answer. So, wow.
It was pretty impactful. And there was no question he was going. And he stayed. But he knew he was going to lose his family. Hmm. And so it was very interesting. And why she didn't blow the whistle on him before, well, I know why, because she didn't want to lose her, you know, source of getting drugs.
Yeah.
So
it was like a very aha moment.
Yeah.
Ooh, what's this?
Yeah. So it was classic, I can tell you that. And
to do an intervention or to be an interventionist, you have got to be prepared for virtually everything. We went in Hoboken, New Jersey, about 3-4 years ago. We went with the family to the woman's house that was the intervention. As we're driving through Hoboken, the caravan stops, and the one brother gets out of the car and says, she's in the hospital. So we moved the intervention from her house straight to the hospital in Hoboken. And I went to the nursing staff and asked them if we could have a room for when this woman was being discharged. And we did the intervention in this room in the hospital. We never made it to the house. We did it right there. She went straight from that hospital to a detox in Jersey and then on to a treatment program where she ultimately stayed about 14 months. So, you know, you've got to be prepared and be able to identify, you know, what's positive and what's negative, who's going to stand in the way of the person going, who's going to be supportive and impactful and getting them to go. I mean, like when the person finally showed up in the room, Carol was in there with the rest of the family. I was outside with this woman's boyfriend, convincing him that he needed to just let this happen, right? And our connection was that he was ex-military and so was I. And he finally agreed. And you know what? About 3 months later, that guy wound up going to treatment and getting sober as well.
Wow.
Right? So, I mean, you've got to be prepared for virtually anything when you walk in the door of an intervention. As much as you want to plan for it, you've got to be prepared and know what to do when those kind of things happen. Because the family is, their natural tendency is to implode. And the interventionist, has to help provide some stability and structure and confidence that we're going to continue to do this. It's going to work. You just got to trust the process.
Yeah, so the intervention can happen anywhere with a team. And again, you adjust and you make it be the right setting. But again, you got to call these audibles. And, I remember one of them, the husband even never came home one night, the night we were doing the intervention. First time he hadn't come home in like years, right? And we're all at the house and he's not there. And I went on like a 6-hour kind of husband hunt. And his buddy was saying he's here. And I ended up talking to him in a parking lot, which isn't like highly recommended, but I was like, hey, just want to let you know, yeah, and this is real, and your wife's concerned, and your whole family's concerned, and he told me some choice words in the, but the whole family was ready for something like this, right? Because it was that time to prepare the family to say, here's how you can address this going forward. Mm-hmm. You all obviously do that, and I call it calling audibles because it's like a quarterback, right? You're like, oh, right. The defense has shifted. We need to do this play now, and you go that route. And so
it's a really good metaphor.
Yeah. Well, it's what we have to do because it's the unpredictable. I know a particular someone that does like interventions the exact same way every single time. He never strays from it, and that's it. And that works for this guy. It doesn't work for me because I'm not here's my box.
We have a described structure, but we also have the flexibility in there with our experience that we can, accommodate changes.
Right. Yeah. We're dealing
with, which I think is vitally important.
It's huge. I don't know how you could do it without being able to do that. So I love when they decide to go get help and they're on their way. And you've already explained that if they don't, then you have another plan. Like, how can we continue to help the loved one, the family? If they completely refuse to go to treatment for whatever reasons, there's a plan B option. It's like, well, maybe we go this route. So how do you address that when it's adamantly, I'm not going anywhere. Y'all are crazy.
Well, our motto is it hasn't worked yet, but it's gonna if you stick with this plan. And we just did an intervention on a 20-something-year-old kid down in Delaware, right?
Oh, yes.
Right before the holidays, right? And he said, I don't care, I'm going to sleep in my car. And they said, well, we're going to take the car. He said, so he found some other woman that was a friend of the family's, left him sleep there. But they kept calling us and we kept, stick to your guns, stick to your guns, stick to your guns. And lo and behold, the first week of January, he went to treatment. He's still there.
Yeah, we stay with the family. Once we contract, we stay with the family till they get into treatment.
That's
beautiful. We don't leave the family standing on the corner with their check in our pockets, walking away saying, oh, well, too bad.
Yeah.
This is life or death for many of them. And to do that, as far as I'm concerned, would be abandonment.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing the process that people are going to walk through. And I think that's important for families to hear and understand. And the other thing I want families to hear, so when they call you, they call an interventionist, what would you say are some very key questions they should ask you to make sure you are capable to help them?
Well, first of all, I think they need to know who they're dealing with. What's your background? How long have you been doing this? What are your qualifications in education? Where have you worked? How much do you know about this treatment program that you're recommending? What's your relationship with that treatment program? You'd be surprised how many times people say that we're getting kickbacks from the treatment programs that we refer to. We explain to them that it's against the law, But just because it's against the law does not mean that there aren't people out there doing it. So we tried to make sure that we let the folks know about our backgrounds, how long we've been doing it, our philosophy, our commitment to them and their patient, or the identified person that's being intervened upon. You know, that we're not interested, we're trying to make a living, you know, based on what we've done in our experience, but we're not here to try to fleece them for our services. We want to make our services available.
And that we're also individual and family therapists. So we work with families every day doing therapy. So we're working with family systems in a way that weekly we're doing little mini interventions with substance abuse and other types of addictions on a regular basis. So we've been trained in that model in order to intervene on a regular basis. So our process and what we've been taught and trained in, we have been working with from the beginning of our careers. So I think that's just as important, is that we are trained therapists and as well as interventionists. And so we're here to help not only the person we're trying to get into treatment, but each person that participates. So we're very dedicated to the process and committed to it to help everyone come away from the process understanding it better and walking away from the process having a different understanding and feeling like they contributed something for their own good, because intervention isn't just for the person we're intervening upon, it's for them as well. So it is a win-win as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, I'm sure if we just had a couple million sitting in the bank, we'd just do them all for free and go help people, right? But, but there's a huge buy-in. The family's investing in you. They're investing in time. It's important to know who you are, from where you come, and relatable. And another reason why I wanted to do the Art of Intervention project, because they can see the two of you right now.
Yeah,
you're obviously real likable people. You work well together, and they can say, man, these are some people I'd like to use to help my family. And in everything you shared, like up to this point in the conversation too, is the reason why people should use interventionists is the knowledge and wisdom you bring of good quality treatment centers that you vet that are out there, and you know will be the right fit for their loved one based on the hopefully open and honest history the family has given both of you to help them move into a positive direction. So, you know, we've talked about intervention, we talked about addiction, and can you kind of dive into a little bit in your own opinions, like what does recovery look like for people afterwards? And how does that lead into a transformed life for people?
Well, the first thing that, you know, I work off of a model that was developed by Scott McMillan and Ron Rogers, and was published in a book called Freeing Someone You Love from Alcohol and Other Drugs. And it's called the 10 Tasks of Recovery for the Alcoholic or the Addict. And then there's also the 10 Tasks of Recovery for the family or concerned person, significant other concerned person. But the first thing you got to do is help somebody stop drinking and using drugs, because they're unable to think clearly while their brain is being bombarded by the substances. So trying to get them to agree with you about different things at that point in time is usually rather unproductive. The best thing that you can possibly do is build a reputation with that individual of trust, building what I consider to be the therapeutic relationship that is at the heart of any good counseling work that you're going to do with that person. One of the most important questions I allow people to ask me is, what do you want to know about me as it relates to my work with you? What do you want to know? And, pretty much, I know there are a lot of people out there that think that self-disclosure is a bad thing. I've not found that to be true at all. I tell them about, the fact that I was an alcoholic from the age of 8, used all and every drug that you could imagine throughout the process of the 60s, and finally got sober. And at the age of 30, after coming out of a blackout with a 12-gauge shotgun in my mouth. And then I tell them about, what happened when I stopped drinking, and that, I was somebody that you went to AA meetings, and after the meeting, the old timers would come up to you and say, Mike, how you doing? And, I'd say, I'm doing good. Well, okay. So they'd say, did you have a drink today? I said, no. They said, good. Come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
They took me through this slowly, right? And they let me know that I was important to them, and that as a person, I had value. But they talked straight to me, which is something that I pride myself in, as my candid and open conversations with people that I work with, trying to help them understand that I'm just a bit further down the road of recovery than they are, but I was there, I understand, and this is what we need to focus on now. And that's where a lot of people get tripped up, because they try to go too fast, right? Everything I've ever read said that to change a habilitative process, it takes about a year. So the first year is really dedicated to setting up a support system, understanding your disease as comprehensively as you can, all knowing that it's going to improve as time goes on, and the longer they're sober, the better their brain's working, that they understand how to use the program to build a support system, right? A feedback system, and then start looking at, their defenses and, the character defects, right? And then making that list of people that got harmed by their behaviors, and then informing the significant others of your plan for recovery. I mean, when I have somebody that I work with, inpatient or outpatient, I lay out a plan of recovery with them that they tape up on the refrigerator, that everybody knows where they're supposed to be related to their recovery at this time. And all they got to do is look at that. And if they're not doing it, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out, right? A lot of people resist doing that because they don't want to tell people what they're going to do, or they don't want to make a commitment. And then step 10 is, you make a plan. What are you going to do if the person does relapse? That the family has some, agreed upon plan. If you don't make it, okay, but you have to be back in treatment within 3 days of your relapse. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go back to rehab. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to, sign your life away or anything else, but you're going to be back either in individual therapy, IOP, PHP, or whatever this counselor determines what your needs are. And that's the first stage of recovery. It's called compliance and change.
Yeah.
You comply whether you agree with it or not, you do it, right? And then, the changes that take place across that continuum are designed to help support your efforts in recovery. And then secondly, it's involvement. That's where they get involved with a home group and actually maybe take a job, start sponsoring people, things of that nature. And then finally, the autonomy stage where, they want to go back to school. I vehemently oppose the programs that try to push people back into college, within the first 60 to 90 days. And what are they doing with them? They're putting them straight back in the environment that they should not be in, right? With no support. And what happens? Families want them to go back to college right away. And then they're surprised where 45 days later, they find out they're not going to class. They've got all zeros, and they've been using again for 30 days.
Yeah.
It's a shock.
Yeah.
Right? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it is. So, and Carol has, some other things that she believes are very effective that work for her as well. So.
Yeah, I
Well,
know,
I
Carol,
think,
in the beginning you were talking, Carol, you still attend your kind of community, right? Since you
yes,
first got sober, and that's a huge thing. I'm a big fan of like community coaching and counseling and aftercare. But what are
without
some
a
things you
doubt.
recommend for people in their own recovery that you've seen work for some of your clients in a variety of ways?
I think women sticking with women. I think women really have a difficult time accepting that they can be alcoholic. I think there's still a lot of shame around that, and finding some other women that they can join with and attend meetings with, or come to a women's group with.
Mm.
We do facilitate a women's group and in our offices. And I think that just one-on-one individual counseling, so that there continues to be more, whether it's in our offices or whoever we refer to or help the treatment center, if we're privy to any of the aftercare process, helping them refer to individuals around the country, because we know many of them, getting them to the right people and helping them connect with providers that have many of the same philosophies that we do, so that they're offering men and women many of the same opportunities, so that they're coming together with men and women so that they build their self-esteem. And with regard to showing up, 90% of success is in showing up
Yeah.
and being able to keep a commitment and knowing what that feels like. And so there's so much, and yet it's a day at a time and sometimes an hour at a time that people need to make their commitments and keep their commitments, and having somebody that understands how to break that down with an individual, how they process, and understanding that individual so that they don't overwhelm them, but help them be able to help themselves and learn how to live, whether they're acting as their coach or their therapist or whatever role they're playing with that newly sober individual. Build a sober life process.
Hmm.
Because many people go back into the mainstream not understanding that they do have a right to a life sober, and that they're not going to be cloistered or expected to sit in the house or whatever else that we're sort of confined to now, but to live a full life. And it's
Yes.
a joy to be sober.
Especially like today, you're talking about right now, just so people that are listening to this too, like we're in this COVID-19 era right now where our physical touch of community has been now in a way stripped from us. So we're online doing things like this and having meetings online, but as a community around the world, really united to say, hey, it is so important, no matter what community you're a part of, whether it's an AA community, Smart Recovery, NA, Celebrate Recovery. I mean, there's so many pathways for people to be in community in our world today.
Right.
But that part of our recovery is so crucial and so important. And I say that so strongly, you guys, because in year 11 of my own recovery, I had a major mental breakdown, which sent me away for a while. And who knew that was going to happen, right? But it's so important to focus on these processes of, it is a process. Change is a process. At the end of all this, we're all three of us on this video right now. We're all three different people that have gone through our own recovery journey and get it.
Right.
And not that interventionists have to have this past, right? But when you go to like a marriage therapist or a marriage counselor who's never been married, I have a hard time relating to you. But when I can know that you've been through the gates of hell as a spouse, a loved one, a daughter, a son, whatever it is, that we can take our community of people in this Art of Intervention project, unite together and say, hey, we're all here to help. We're all one big fat happy family. It's not like these are my sheep, stay away.
Right.
But your insight today has been wonderful and amazing. And is there any encouragement you want to give to our, and I always say our listeners, our viewers, or our readers, because this is a multimedia project, any advice you'd like to give them that are on the cusp of maybe making a decision to reach out for help?
Don't give up before the miracle happens.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. Don't give up. Keep asking questions, keep coming back, because there may be one more question you need to ask. And there aren't too many questions.
So speaking of reaching out, how the heck do people reach out to you guys? How do they find you?
A lot is word of mouth, treatment centers, friends.
Our website, Intervention First.
He found it.
And that would be
AIS.
And our phone numbers, I think, are on there. If not, I think I'll give you mine, that they can call me anytime, 24/7, is 336-403-0635. And Carol's?
484-678-3796.
I think the beginning of yours cut out, Carol. What's your number again?
Oh, 484-678-3796.
There you go, guys. So if you're driving in the car and you're listening on a podcast or you're watching the video or whatever, reach out for help. Just have the conversation. See where it goes from there. You never know what you're going to learn or how it's going to move you to the next step of change. But I just want to thank both of you for your time, Carol and Mike. You guys are awesome, and thanks for being a part of this educational process and this resource for families and professionals.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
You got it. I'll talk to you soon. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.